If you've watched season 1 of American Horror Story, you probably remember this man. Dr. Montgomery, the man who initially builds Murder House in 1922. We see his character decline as he begins to perform illegal abortions in the house. He's also the one seen mutilating character Elizabeth Short, the one who's portraying the real-life Black Dahlia. His character is inspired by a real-life doctor who is the prime suspect in the actual Black Dahlia murder. During the 1940s, a man named George Hodel was a prominent physician who led a venereal disease clinic in LA. He was known for being extremely intelligent and charismatic, but he also had a dark side. It's been noted that he used his wealth and political connections to essentially do whatever he wanted. And it's noted that he would have these decadent sexual parties at his Mayan-style mansion. The house is stunning. Also, it's been confirmed that George was listed as one of the prime suspects for the actual murder. For starters, he had the medical background to perform a hemicorporectomy, which I believe I'm saying right. This was a surgical procedure to cut the body in half underneath the lumbar spine. This was the only area where you could cut the body in half without breaking a bone. According to the original DA files, Elizabeth was one of George's many girlfriends. This was shared by another one of George's girlfriends who claims that she had saw Elizabeth at his mansion multiple times. In recent years, an LA Times columnist named Steve Lopez persuaded the DA to allow him to review the original Black Dahlia case files. The columnist Lopez would go on the record to say when he opened the files, a photo of George fell out, and that other documents confirmed that police had actually bugged his home. Lopez found transcripts of conversations that were recorded from inside the house itself. On February 18th, 1950, Hodel remarks, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." These hidden microphones also provided transcripts from February 19th, 1950, where a woman is heard crying, attempting to call the operator on the phone. And following this call attempt, a woman is heard screaming. This sound is followed by a sound of dinging and metal clangs. 5 minutes later, another scream is heard, and then 2 minutes after that, a final scream. Also, it's worth noting that Hodel's secretary, Ruth Spalding, that he referred to in the 1950 audio, died of a sudden drug overdose in 1945. Although Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, did not die until 1947. This is 2 years after Ruth's death, so if she had any information that was incriminating, it would have been for something that was unrelated. Regardless of this suspicious evidence, he's never formally charged for anything. But things take a turn in 1999 when George Hodel passes away at the age of 91. And it's after his death that his son, a retired LAPD detective named Steve, begins to go through his father's belongings. Also, it's worth noting that Steve and his father were not extremely close because in 1950, his father just left the States, flew overseas, lived there for 40 years, and basically left his family here behind. But in 1990, his father would move back to the United States and move to San Francisco. So after George passes away, Steve is going through his father's belongings and comes across a box that has an old photo album inside. As he's turning through the pages, he sees family photos, basically what you would expect. But then suddenly he stops when he comes across 2 photos in particular. He's stunned when he sees photos of a young woman with curly black hair and her eyes closed because instantly he thinks this looks a lot similar to Elizabeth Short. So son Steve begins to use his detective skills to deep dive into the life of his father. Throughout the years, he compiles enough evidence to write a novel called The Black Dahlia Avenger that he releases in 2003. Throughout the novel, he portrays his father as a pompous man who thought he was smarter than everybody else and that he was only motivated by power, money, and sex. But that also sounds like a lot of people. His son also reveals that during the 1930s, his father started to drink heavily and use opium on himself. And that his father George started living by the philosophy that there was no difference between dreaming at night when you're asleep versus when you're awake. And that during the early 1940s, his father began to abduct women late at night and allegedly murdered several of them. And that the only reason his father fled the US in 1950 was because District Attorney William E. Simpson's staff took over the Black Dahlia investigation from the LAPD, essentially pointing out that his father's connections with the LAPD kept him safe and protected until the case was turned over to the DA. And since the release of Steve's book, many have supported the theory that his father was the Black Dahlia murderer. Even the LAPD admits that this case is convincing, and that George Hodel could have been the killer. Although key evidence from the murder in 1947 has mysteriously went missing. Honestly, this is just another one of those layers that only make this case that much more mysterious, since it appears that there was some real corruption at the time. What do you think? Follow along as I continue to unbox these American Horror Story references one by one, season by season. And if you're a fan of this series, please subscribe to my YouTube channel where I will be releasing longer format videos that review these cases in more detail.